UFC President Dana White officially announced UFC Fight Night Saudi Arabia on February 1st. The main event is Israel Adesanya versus Nassourdine Imavov. The co-main event is Shara Bullet Magomedov versus MVP Michael Venom Page. And what an incredible Fight Night card. This goes down February 1st in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is just paying such a substantial amount of money that the UFC is bringing pay-per-view level cards for Fight Night cards. This is a Fight Night card. And we know what happened earlier this year. In case you've been living under a rock, earlier this year, the UFC was supposed to put on a UFC Fight Night card in Saudi Arabia in March. The UFC put together such a shit quality card, it had to be moved to the Apex because Saudi Arabia said, no, we're paying you all this money. We want a banger card. So then in June, they brought back a banger card, which was supposed to be headlined by Chimaev Whitaker. Ultimately, that fight didn't happen, but stacked from top to bottom with incredible fights because Saudi Arabia is paying a ridiculous site fee. For those of you who don't understand what site fees are, the UFC loves staying at the Apex now, even though, we're like 4 years after the pandemic, because the UFC doesn't have to pay any overhead cost. And what they have done really nowadays, instead of traveling, they essentially only travel to places that are willing to pay a site fee. So they struck a deal with the Australian government. They struck a deal with the Saudi Arabia government. They struck a deal with the Abu Dhabi government. And I'm sure there's other examples that I'm not thinking of right off the top of my head. I think New Jersey might have even recently had a deal where the local government pays the UFC to bring an event there. Otherwise, the UFC doesn't want to go. Okay, they want a lot of money to be paid to go there. Otherwise, they don't want to go there. And Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi are willing to pay such a substantial amount of money that the UFC is essentially ready to throw away pay-per-view stars in a way on Fight Night cards because they don't care because they're not losing money. It's like Saudi Arabia is already prepaying them the pay-per-view. That's why Saudi Arabia told them no to the card in March because the card in March was absolutely abysmal. It was a horrific, ugly, terrible card, piece of shit card, little piece of shit card. And Saudi Arabia said, no, come back with a better card. June, they came back with an absolute banger. Now, February 1st, 2025, they're coming back with Israel Adesanya versus Nassourdine Imavov, which is a straight-up heater. Absolutely heater in the middleweight division. A very important fight in the middleweight division, particularly for Israel Adesanya, former middleweight champion. What's insane is Israel Adesanya has not been in a title fight since all the way back in 2018 when he fought Derek Brunson. And since then, he's been in a title fight in every fight since. So he's been in a title fight from February of 2019 until now, until this fight against Imavov, February of 2025. So, basically 6 years, the amount of time that Chandler's been waiting for Conor McGregor. And he hasn't not headlined a pay-per-view since April of 2019 is the last time he did not headline a pay-per-view, which was UFC 236. He fought in the co-main event against Kelvin Gastelum for the interim middleweight title. Since then, every single event, he has headlined a pay-per-view. So he hasn't fought in a Fight Night card since his third fight in the UFC against Brad Tavares back in 2018. Summer of 2018 is the last time Israel Adesanya has not fought on a pay-per-view card, which is straight up insanity. And on top of that, on top of the very compelling, interesting, high-level main event, on top of that, the card's pretty stacked. I mean, for a Fight Night card, this card's stacked. We'll take a look at it for a second. You have Israel Adesanya versus Nassourdine Imavov as the main event. You have Shara Bullet Magomedov versus Michael Venom Page, which we're going to talk about this fight in a little bit. We're mainly going to focus on the main co-main event in this video. But this fight, while I love, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but we'll get to that later. We have Ikram Aliskerov versus Andre Muniz. We have Sergey Pavlovich versus Jorginho Rosenstruck. We have Muhammad Naimov on the card. We have Said Nurmagomedov versus Vinicius Oliveira. I mean, that's a straight-up banger. Said Nurmagomedov for Vinicius Oliveira is a banger bantamweight matchup. I mean, you have Jamal Pogues. I'm kidding on that one. But yeah, this card's pretty stacked. You have Shamil Ghazi versus Thomas Jefferson, a.k.a. Thomas Peterson. This is a really, really high-level Fight Night card. I mean, just the main card here, which, I'll just show you one more time, is absolutely insane. And it's headlined by Adesanya. Adesanya is one of the few UFC stars. He's not a Conor McGregor, but he's one of the few people who can draw pay-per-view buys in the UFC, and they're putting him on a Fight Night card in one of the most important fights of his career because Israel Adesanya isn't getting any younger. He's lost 3 out of his last 4. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. And now he's coming in and he's fighting a killer in Nassourdine Imavov, who's on a decent winning streak right now. I mean, he's on a 3-fight winning streak, a 4-fight unbeaten streak. He had the no contest against Chris Curtis. He was looking good in that fight up until the head clash, where then the fight just basically ended up getting stopped because of the head clash, but he looked like he was on his way to winning. Now, we don't truly know, but either way, since then, he beat up Roman Dolidze, beat up Jarrett Cannonier, beat up Brendan Allen in his last fight, and you have Israel Adesanya on the other side, who got finished by Dricus du Plessis via rear naked choke in one of the best fights of 2024, in my opinion. Before that, lost to Sean Strickland in a fight where he really didn't look like he showed up. Before that, it was the crazy KO win over Alex Pereira. And then before that was the loss to Alex Pereira. So in 3 out of his last 4, he's lost. And in 2 out of his last 4, he got finished. And now he's fighting Nassourdine Imavov, who Nassourdine Imavov right now, 28 years old. Israel Adesanya, I think, is 35, right? Yeah, Israel Adesanya is 35. This is potentially the beginning of the end of Israel Adesanya. If he loses to Nassourdine Imavov, he's done for, okay? And Imavov is a very, very good fighter. I'm going to get to my early prediction here in a second, but Imavov's really good. He's very well-rounded. The one kind of hole in his game, but I don't even know if it's truly a hole in his game, is his cardio, you know? In his last fight against Brendan Allen, he looked like shit. He was completely gassed in the 3rd round, and, you know, he got out-grappled badly in the 1st round, but he looked horrible in the 3rd round. Even Allen was touching him up on the feet. Allen has garbage striking. But then we've seen in other fights, like the Jarrett Cannonier fight previous to that, in the 4th round, he looked good and got the finish. It was a little bit of an early stoppage, but still got the finish. He went, I think it was 5 rounds with Roman Dolidze as well. Yeah, 5 rounds with Roman Dolidze. He went 5 rounds with Sean Strickland on short notice. Now, in that fight, his cardio kind of failed him a bit too, but his cardio has kind of been hit or miss. And also, I think people look at Nassourdine Imavov as kind of a Dagestani, but he's not your typical Dagestani wrestler grappler. He has some grappling. And also, I meant to mention, in the Joaquin Buckley fight, 3rd round, his cardio failed. So depending on the pace, Imavov could gas out in this fight. But he is 28 years old versus a 35-year-old Israel Adesanya who's on a losing streak. Even though he looked incredible against Dricus, he's on a losing streak here. So for Adesanya, if he loses here, he will have lost, 4 out of his last 5? That's insane to think of. 4 out of his last 5. And then where does he go from there? Where do you book him from there? I have no idea. So he needs to win. What's crazy is if Adesanya loses this fight, it's basically the end of his career. If he wins, he's right back in title discussion. If he wins this fight, and let's say he wins in emphatic fashion, let's say he sleeps Imavov, Imavov gets tired late in the fight and he sleeps Imavov, the UFC is going to try to set up one way or another either a du Plessis-Adesanya 2 fight or a Khamzat Chimaev-Adesanya fight. Could you imagine how big that would be? Khamzat Chimaev, Israel Adesanya, early 2026. I mean, that's possible because if du Plessis runs through Sean Strickland, hypothetically, he's most likely fighting Khamzat Chimaev next. If Adesanya wins this fight, maybe they book him in one more fight. He wins that fight. They're going to book him against the winner. Adesanya's no more than 2 fights away from a title shot. Whether you like that or not, I'm just stating facts here. I'm not saying my own beliefs of what I think he should have to do. We would have to see who he fights and how the results go and how the division looks like at that time. But there's no doubt in my mind, Adesanya could be 1 fight away from a title shot, but definitely no more than 2 fights away from a title shot. If he beats Nassourdine Imavov, 1 more fight, he's right in the title discussion. Even with this win, if he does beat Imavov, he's right in the title discussion. And du Plessis-Adesanya 2 is massive, as well as Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya is also massive. But who do I think is going to win this matchup? Listen, Imavov is a very slick striker, but when you're getting outstruck by Brendan Allen in the 3rd round, regardless if it's a cardio issue, I have to go Adesanya. This guy has gone 5 rounds multiple times. He's a super calculated striker. Imavov doesn't have this elite level grappling, and even so, Adesanya has really good defensive grappling. I think in the du Plessis fight, I think Adesanya pushed the pace very heavily and decided to be very aggressive in that fight, and I think it actually wore on his cardio. And just recently, I watched the finish, and it was just like Dricus was in that moment being more aggressive because he had more in the tank, where Adesanya got a little lazy late. He could have probably scrambled up if he had the energy, but he didn't have the energy because he had been in this grueling fight with du Plessis. Du Plessis just snatched up his back and choked him out. I don't think Imavov has that dog in him to do that. I really don't. So I foresee this fight being a very competitive fight on the feet. I see Imavov trying to mix in the clinch and the grappling. I don't think Imavov is the level of grappler that is going to give Adesanya trouble. I think you have to be a really elite level grappler, but I think also you have to be able to push the pace. I think Adesanya's defensive grappling is really sound, but it's when he starts to get tired is when he has the issues. I mean, even you think about the Vettori fight. Vettori got the back, Adesanya scrambled out and scrambled up. Whitaker, I believe, got the back in their second fight, scrambled out and got right back up. Was able to go back to the striking. I don't think Imavov can push a pace to force Adesanya to basically slow down and gas and make mistakes on the ground, which is what I think he has to do here. And I think on the feet, Adesanya is way too accurate. He's way too high level of a kickboxer. And I think Imavov is going to have some success. I think Imavov is actually an underrated striker. I don't know how many people are going to pick him in this fight, but don't let the name fool you. A lot of people see the name. I know he's technically, I think he grew up in France. That's why he kind of reps France, but he's born in Dagestan. Don't let that fool you. He's primarily a striker. And I just don't think Adesanya has fallen off enough where I can imagine Nassourdine Imavov going out there and out kickboxing him. I think Nassourdine Imavov's going to have to grapple. And if he's forced to grapple, that means he's going to get tired sooner. Look at him against Brendan Allen. He was completely gassed in the third round. Allen was landing shots. If Allen wasn't forcing the takedowns late in the third round, maybe Allen could have won that third round. So Imavov is a guy similar to Adesanya. He likes to dictate the pace and kind of keep the pace a little bit slower and cleaner and not ugly. And that way he can conserve his energy. And when he's done that, he's been able to, get a fourth round stoppage against Jarrett Kinnear. He's been able to, survive a 5-round fight with Sean Strickland where he lost that fight. But either way, it wasn't as high of a pace where I think you need to push a high pace against Israel Adesanya to be able to mix in the grappling, to get him fatigued, to be able to get the better of him in some of the striking exchanges. And I don't think Imavov has that cardio. I look at him in the third round against Joaquin Buckley as well. So in this fight, I have to go Israel Adesanya. It is tough, though. Thinking of him, lost 3 out of his last 4, finished 2 out of his last 4. And the fact that he's 35 years old, taking on a guy who's got all the momentum. But this is a big fight for both guys. I mean, Nassourdine Imavov beats Israel Adesanya. He's in the title discussion right away. I mean, if he beats Israel Adesanya, he's right up there with Khamzat Chimaev. Essentially, Khamzat Chimaev should be next because of the win over Robert Whitaker, I think, in my opinion. I mean, unless Imavov goes out there and schools Adesanya and finishes him in the second round after dominating him, I could see him maybe leapfrogging Chimaev on merit-based, but I don't see him leapfrogging him regardless. But if Imavov just wins, period, he should be next after Chimaev. So, huge fight for him. And for Israel, this is his career on the line. If he doesn't win this fight, I mean, who do you book him against next? We can look at the UFC rankings. I have Imavov up here, but we can look at the UFC rankings really quick. If Adesanya loses, so he's number 2. If he loses, who do they book him against? What are they going to do? A Marvin Vettori trilogy, a Jarrett Kinnear rematch, a Brendan Allen fight? Maybe a Brendan Allen fight, maybe a Roman Dolidze fight, maybe a Paulo Costa rematch. I don't know. It's just going to be, I think Adesanya still has some of that intrigue, still has some of that star power that we look for. And I don't think that these losses have done that much to tarnish him, to be quite honest. He has 4 losses in his UFC career and in his MMA career in general. Lost to Dricus, no shame in that. Dricus is the middleweight champion. Lost to Sean Strickland. That was, over a year ago now because he didn't fight for a while after that. And Sean Strickland's still in the title discussion today, jabbing his teeth and teeping his way to a title shot against Paulo Costa in a split decision. Before that, lost to Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is the light heavyweight champion. Only the loss before that was prime Jan Blachowicz. So, I mean, the losses, Jan Blachowicz, Alex Pereira, Sean Strickland, Dricus du Plessis. I don't think that means Israel Adesanya is washed up by any means. And even a loss to Nassourdine Imavov, I don't think it means he's washed up. But at the same time, if you lost 4 out of your last 5, where do you go? And it's a weird position where you're getting paid a substantial amount of money from the UFC. You kind of lost some of that luster because you've lost so many fights. You can't headline a pay-per-view, really. You shouldn't headline a pay-per-view anymore. So what is he going to be, a weird pay-per-view co-main eventer against a Paulo? The UFC will have to try to find a way to get him back on track. And I don't think Adesanya's going to want to stick around if he feels like his skills aren't up to par. I think he's going to be one of those guys that's you know what, I'm retiring. I'm not going to sit around and embarrass myself and go on this long losing streak. So it's going to be very interesting to see, if Israel Adesanya does lose, where does he go from there? But if he wins, I mean, a million big fight. I mean, he could literally fight Dricus again. He could fight Strickland again. And he could fight Chimaev. All those fights would be massive. You have Caio Borralho going to be in the title picture very, very soon. So it's very interesting. But ultimately, my early prediction for this fight, I think Adesanya is going to beat him on the feet. Again, I don't think Nassourdine Imavov has the ability to push the pace. That's going to make Adesanya make mistakes. And also, look at the way, I think Adesanya looked better than ever against Dricus du Plessis. Going in that 4th round, midway through that 4th round, I thought Adesanya was a shoo-in to win. I thought he clearly had won the fight already. I thought it was over. In my mind, it was over already. It was like, when Bilal picked Leon Edwards up and just dumped him on his bald spot. I knew it was a wrap then and there. Midway through that fourth round, I was like 95% sure Adesanya had beat Duplessis. And then Duplessis, like the dog he is, just pulls it out of the fire and goes out there and chases Adesanya down and gets the rear naked choke. So I think he still gets it done. I don't think he's not showing me shades of Tony Ferguson at all. I think he beats Nassourdine Imavov and gets himself right back into the title picture. But it's going to be interesting to see how fast the UFC pushes him towards a title shot. Do they do it right away? Do they make him get at least one other win, which I believe he should have to? It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And if Imavov wins, that's the biggest win of his career. But this is the biggest test of his career. And ultimately, I don't think he can mix in the grappling enough to get it done against Israel Adesanya. Now, in terms of the co-main event, we have Shara Bullet Magomedov versus MVP Michael Venom Page. This is an interesting fight. I almost wonder if the UFC thought about booking Adesanya versus Shara Bullet Magomedov, because Shara Bullet Magomedov called out Israel Adesanya, and that would have been a crazy main event for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia could have potentially pushed for that a little bit. But 15-0 Shara Bullet Magomedov fighting Michael Venom Page, who's coming up from 170. Both guys, elite level kickboxers. People don't give Michael Venom Page enough credit for being an elite level striker. Now, both of them have absolute dog shit grappling. I mean, some of the worst grappling I've ever seen. Shara Bullet's getting taken down by Bruno Silva like he's prime Khabib Nurmagomedov. So I think this fight's going to be primarily on the feet. Who wins this matchup? And honestly, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But I think it's fun matchmaking, considering Shara Bullet is like barely ranked in the middleweight division right now. Michael Venom Page, I don't even think he's ranked in the welterweight division right now, is he? Let's see. He's ranked number 15. So basically, you have 14 ranked middleweight Shara Bullet Magomedov versus 15 ranked Michael Venom Page in the welterweight division. Both primarily strikers, both fun to watch. It's just a super fun matchup that's not really consequential to either division. And what I think it comes down to is you have Michael Venom Page, right, who's 37 years old, going on 38. He's a guy that has absolutely no grappling, especially no offensive grappling. And it's going to be a striking match, and it's going to be who gets the better of the striking. And I just think Shara Bullet Magomedov is the better striker. I just think on top of that, even if it's close, Shara has more power. So I can see Shara, if you're the same skill level and one guy's a little bit bigger and one guy's a little bit more strong, a little bit stronger, a little bit more powerful, you're going to give the edge to that fighter. And that's basically the way I see this fight. I think Michael Venom Page is very tricky on the feet, but I don't think Shara Bullet Magomedov is going to be worried about the KO power coming back. Maybe he should, but I think Michael Venom Page is even skinny for 170. He's not a huge 170er. He's going up to 185. Shara Bullet Magomedov, I think he's going to be too big, too strong. And also, MVP is very heavy on that lead leg. He's very reliant on his feints. And I see Shara Bullet Magomedov just chopping those legs. And honestly, we're watching Kevin Holland get MVP down and get into a borderline rear naked choke position. It wouldn't shock me if Magomedov mixes in the grappling against MVP, because he's going to be bigger and stronger. And I know both of them have dog shit takedown defense and dog shit wrestling. But if anyone's going to get the advantage, I think it's going to be Shara Bullet Magomedov. Just because, Kevin Holland has literally no grappling at all, and he's able to get in a good position on the ground against MVP. So I think Shara Bullet probably wins that fight. Again, more power. I think he's bigger. I think he's stronger. And I think they're close on the feet. I think, obviously Magomedov relies more on his kicks, I think. MVP kind of utilizes everything. He's got flashy flying knees. He has a lot of kicks and punches. Where Magomedov, I feel like, relies primarily just on his kicks. But his hands aren't bad by any means. There's certain guys like Anthony Pettis who has elite level kicks, but the hands are just non-existent and horrible. I don't think Magomedov is that guy. And then he's 7 years younger. He's definitely going to be bigger. I see Michael Venom Page coming to this fight at middleweight. I think he's going to look like Jamal Muffin Top Hill. That's what I think. He's just going to look like a chubby middleweight. I think that's going to slow him down. I think that's going to reduce his kind of effectiveness on the feet, because he relies on his speed and his feints. And Magomedov's an elite level kickboxer, and he's not going to be slowing down here. He's not going up a weight class, putting on weight, where MVP, he's going up in weight to 185. That's a big jump. It's not a 5 pound. It's not a 10 pound jump, which, even 10 pound jump is significant. This is 15 pounds. This is from 170 to 185. I think it's going to slow him down. I think he's going to have a little pop belly on him, Jamal Hill muffin top style. And I think that Shara Bullet Magomedov will get it done against MVP. But I'll tell you this, guys, the card is absolutely incredible. And it's weird how the UFC keeps, they announce one shitty event, one good event. Well, you know what? Actually, we'll end this video on this. We'll look at the future. By the way, Shara Bullet Magomedov, real quick. Coming off a win over Armin Petrosian, that crazy spinning double back fist, which was absolutely insane. Beat Michael Olszewczyk before that. Beat Antonio Tricoli. Been super active. 3 fights in 2024. 3 fights in 2024. MVP. He's coming off a win, or he's coming off a loss against Ian Machado Gary. No shame in that, but easily out-grappled in that fight. Now, we know Gary is very good as an elite-level fighter. Almost beat Shavkat. But yeah, I just think Shara Bullet gets it done. But I want to look at the rest, or the events we have from 2025 so far. So if you look at the schedule, January 11th, we have Mackenzie Dern versus Amanda Ribas still. Horrible. Absolutely horrible. Atrocious. I might even make a video on this. This is the worst event to come back to after 4 weeks off. Then we have UFC 311, Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan 2, co-main event, Merab Dvalishvili versus Umar Nurmagomedov for the bantamweight title. So 2 title fights there. That card's stacked underneath of it as well. Then we skip a week. Then the following week, we have Israel Adesanya versus Nassourdine Imavov, which we obviously just broke down. UFC Fight Night, Saudi Arabia. Insane that that's a fight night. Then we skip a week. Or no, we don't skip a week. Then the following week is UFC 312, Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland. You think that's a coincidence, by the way? You think that's a coincidence? They're having 4 top middleweights all fight around the same time? Imagine Adesanya gets a crazy highlight reel win, and maybe Sean Strickland beats du Plessis, and maybe he beats him convincingly. I'm just making up a hypothetical scenario. Now, Khamzat should be next. But at this point, who knows with the UFC? Undeserved title shot after undeserved title shot. They might slide Adesanya into a rematch against Sean Strickland because he's a company man. He's made the UFC a lot of money over the years. They might say, you know what? We really want this Adesanya-Strickland 2 rematch. It makes a lot of money. Adesanya's been asking us for it. We owe him for whatever reason they want to say. Don't be surprised if something like that happens. So we have a lot of big events in this like little 4-week period between 311 and 312. I mean, we're going to pay for it later on. I mean, remember that, was it, I think it was right before UFC 300. Oh my God, or right after UFC 300. We had that lull of like terrible events. So we're going to pay for that later on. But these 3 events, February, late January, early February of 2025 are going to be absolutely incredible. I cannot wait. But how insane is it? Israel Adesanya headlining a UFC Fight Night card. That's how much Saudi Arabia is paying. By the way, it's going to be on in the middle of the afternoon. You know, obviously, when Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi pays these huge site fees, they want it in prime time for the live audience. And UFC doesn't care if it's not on in a prime time for the USA because they're not relying on pay-per-view buys, because the money has been supplemented by the site fee from Saudi Arabia or Abu Dhabi. So the card is going to be on. Let's see if it says on Tapology actually really quick before we end this video. Yeah, it says 12 p.m. Eastern. So I don't know if that's the prelim start time or the main card start time, but right now it says 12 p.m. Eastern time for Adesanya versus Imavov. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.